Welcome to another day of Mr. Mann's Anatomy and Physiology class. Hope you guys enjoy. We're going to cover Unit 8, Part 2 notes. This is going to be very, very important as we talk about the second half of the muscular system. Due to the first half, we looked at specifically the physiology part with part of the general skeletal anatomy. And today we're going to look at the macroanatomy of certain muscles and how we name them. So we're going to name skeletal muscles by 7 ways. We're going to look at direction of muscle fibers. So the rectus means straight along across the midline or an axis. So the rectus abdominis, the muscle fibers are going or along the midline. Therefore, that's why we would have rectus to start with the name there. Now, some of the times when we deal with naming skeletal muscles, there are more than one way that we name them, or more than one different naming system we use. And so then we have relative size of the muscle. So maximus would mean largest, like the gluteus maximus. This will kind of get us into number 3. So that would be location of the gluteal portion of the body, gluteal or gluteus, and the maximus would be the relative size. We have location of the muscle. This where it either covers a certain bone or part of a certain part of the body due to our areas that we've named, like with brachialis or gluteal or calcaneus or anything like that. Number of organs. So biceps brachii, bi means 2. We have 2 organs, or the number of organs there. We have location of the muscle's origin and insertion. And kind of review, an origin is the attached and movable bone, or less movable. Insertion is attached to a movable bone. So the sternocleidomastoid, okay, we have the sternum and clavicle, the sternocleido part, and then the mastoid would be inserts in the mastoid process. And we have the shape of the muscle. We have the deltoid, means triangular or trapezius, means trapezoid shape. And we have action of the muscle, and our adductor muscles cause the thigh to adduct. And so one of the biggest things with like the action of the muscle is if it's adductors or if it's flexors or extenders, those would be actions of muscles. And so these are just kind of giving you some examples of what we looked at. I'm not going to hold you accountable to these, but these would be like with muscle fibers. This is a circular shape or the shape of the muscle. Having 2 heads of a muscle here. And things like that. So again, these are just kind of giving you some visual representation of that. I'm not going to hold you accountable to this. However, it kind of gives you a visual representation. So now we're going to look at gross anatomy of muscles. So we have our head and neck muscles. We have our facial muscles. We have our fontinalis, which covers the frontal bone. It's going to raise our eyebrows. We have our occipitals. It's going to cover the occipital bone. It's going to pull our scalp posteriorly. And we'll have all these labeled too, so you're going to be held accountable for labeling as well as what they do. And your orbicularis or oculi. It's going to circle the eyes. It's going to close eyes, squints, blinks, and winks. That's what we're going to help your eyes do. We have our orbicularis oris, which is going to circle the mouth. It's going to close the mouth, protrudes lips. It's what we would call, in layman's terms, the kissing muscle. We have our buccinator. Okay, it's going to run horizontally across the cheeks. It's going to flatten the cheeks to aid in chewing. We have our zygomatics, and this is going to form from the corner of your mouth to the zygomatic bone, as you know that from our bone practical, and it's going to raise the corners of the mouth, or what we deal with on smiling. So these are all facial muscles. Now we're dealing with chewing muscles. Chewing would mean mastification. And so our masseter it goes from the zygomatic muscle or process to the mandible. It's going to close the jaw by elevating the mandible, and it's the prime mover or the muscle with a major responsibility for this movement in chewing. Okay, temporalis is a fan-shaped muscle overlying the temporal bone, and is going to act as a synergist muscle to the masseter. And a synergist is a helper muscle, or in other words, in other anatomy classes, you would hear it as an assistant mover. So we have a prime mover, muscle with a major responsibility, and assistant would be to help that muscle. And then we have also a fixator, and it's going to stabilize the origin of the prime mover. So we have our platysma, and it's going to be a single sheet of muscle that covers the anterior lateral part of the neck. It's going to pull the corners of the mouth inferiorly to create a frown. And then we have one of my favorite muscles, the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And on each side of the neck, it's going to flex the neck and rotate the head. And so what I've done is I've labeled these. Now, our frontalis and our occipitals are held together by our cranial aponeurosis, or a flat-like sheet that we looked at previously the last couple of days. And so we have our temporalis here, our occipitals, sternocleidomastoid, our masseter here, being in both places, our buccinator, which is right here, our zygomatics, which is right here, our occipularis orculi here, our frontalis, our occipularis oris, and then our plasmata right there. And then this is just a picture without some of the muscles we've already looked at, so that you can see clearly. So with our temporalis, of what it really looks like underneath, because they are deep muscles comparatively to what the other ones were. Our masseter, we can see the insertion of the masseter there, and then our buccinator as well as it travels. And then here's a picture of an actual cadaver, just kind of showing you where some of these muscles are. I wouldn't give you this picture. I would give you either this one or this one, but it's just kind of cool to be able to see that in real time. So then we have our trunk muscles. We have our anterior muscles. We have our pectoralis major. This is the fan shape and the covering part of the upper part of the chest. It adducts and flexes the arm. We have intercostals. These are the deep muscles found between the ribs. So we have two different types of intercostals. We have the external intercostals and the internal intercostals. The external is going to raise the rib cage during inhaling, and the internal is going to depress the rib cage when we exhale, which either opens up the chest or closes the chest due to needing for lung function. Then we have our rectus abdominis, and it's going to be from our pubis to rib cage, and it's enclosed in an aponeurosis, or that sheath-like that we saw between the fontanelles and the occipitals, where the cranial aponeurosis. It's going to flex the vertebral column and compress the abdominal contents. Then we have our external obliques. It's going to make up lateral walls of the abdomen. It's going to flex our vertebral column and rotate the trunk and bend it laterally. We have our internal obliques, and these are going to be deep to the external obliques. Okay, and they're going to do the same function as the external obliques. And then we have our transverse abdominis, and these are the deepest muscle in the abdomen, and the fibers run horizontally to compress the abdomen's contents. So now looking at posterior muscles, we have the trapezius, the posterior neck and upper trunk. It extends the head / elevate, depresses, adducts, and stabilizes the scapula. Then we have our latissimus dorsi. It's going to cover the lower back, extend, and adducts the humerus. Then we have our rectus spinae. It's 3 pairs of muscles deep in the back, and it deals with back extension. Now there are 3 sections of the erector spinae. I want you to look those up and fill that part in of your notes. Then we have our quadratus laborum. It's going to be part of the posterior abdominal wall, and it flexes the spine laterally. Then we have our deltoid, which is going to form a round shape of the shoulder and deals with arm abduction or abduction. And so here we're labeling these. We have our external obliques, and one thing I want to really point out is how the obliques run. So we have our external obliques here. They're running at a diagonal from top left to bottom right. Our transverse abdominis are running basically midline or rectus or transverse. And then our internal obliques are running from bottom left to top right. So we have 3 different types of fibers to form our obliques here. Then here we have our pectoralis major. Then we have our rectus abdominis. As you see, there are 4 rectus abdominis, so you have 8 abs. But they align underneath this aponeurosis here. And then here's some lateral views and a superior view. And I've just kind of partially labeled those for you so you know what those were. Then we have our deltoid, or our triangle shape over the shoulder. We have our trapezius. We have our 3 different erector spinae, our quadratus lumborum, and our latissimus dorsi. One of the big things with this trap, though, is when you take upper level anatomy classes, is you actually have 4 different traps. Or we have them separated as trap 1, 2, 3, and 4 due to the running of the muscle fibers as we looked at naming them earlier. It's just kind of a fun fact where you won't need to know that. And then here's a better picture of our pectoralis major and our internal and external intercostals. Remember, our internal is going to run deep and it's going to deal with depressing, while external is more superficial. Then our rhomboids here, we didn't talk about it, but it's extra for you. It's going to hold the scapula and attaches to the vertebrae. And when you deal with retracting of your scapula, you're going to be working out your rhomboids. And then we have our triceps brachii right here. There's actually 3 heads to the triceps brachii, or tri. You can only really see 2 origins here. However, this deals with extension of the arm. And then our biceps brachii. We have 2 muscles right here, or bi means 2. And your long head's going to cross the shoulder. So our biceps brachii, and then we have our brachialis right here, is going to run anterior upper arm. It's going to flex the elbow and supinate the forearm. Our brachialis is going to run deep to the biceps and it's going to flex the elbow as well. Our triceps brachii is going to run posterior upper arm. It's going to extend elbow. Then we have our flexor and extensor carpi, and that's within the forearm. That's going to do flexion extension of the forearm there, or the wrist as well. Then we have our flexor extensor digitorum, and it's within there in the forearm. It's going to flex and extend our fingers, or digits. So we have our pectoralis major, our deltoid, our biceps brachii, and our brachialis here. This is a tendon. This is our flexor and extensor carpi. This is what's going to move here. We have our flexor and extensor digitorum. I'm not going to ask you to label individual muscles here. Just know this is these as groups. And then here is where you find carpal tunnel within the wrist. So now we're going to do some muscles of the lower limb. So we're going to do muscles that of the hip joint. So we have our gluteus maximus, and it's the flesh of the buttocks, and it's superficial, and it's going to deal with hip extension. We have our gluteus medius, and it's mostly deep to the maximus, and it's hip abduction. Then we have our gluteus minimus, and it's the deepest glute muscle. Now, maximus, medius, minimus, you would think size. The maximus is the biggest, minimus is the smallest. Those are all accurate, and we name those based off the size. So then we have the iliopsoas, and it's the deepest, or it's deep in the pelvic and the pelvis, and deals with hip flexion. And it's composed of 2 muscles. They're basically 2 small muscles, and we've combined them because there's a really hard time discerning which one where one originates and one doesn't, and which one inserts and which one doesn't. So we combine them together, called the iliopsoas, and it's the iliacus and the psoas major. And then we have the adductor muscle group, and it's the medial thigh, and it adducts the thigh, or adducts, pulls it away. Or adducts is pulling it towards, sorry. So here's our iliopsoas, our two muscles here are psoas major and our iliacus. And then we have our adductor muscle group, and it's on the inside of the leg because that's when we contract it, we're pulling the leg into the body. So here we have our posterior iliac crest right here. We have our gluteus medius here. We have our gluteus maximus here, and our sciatic nerve right here. So if you ever have a very, very tight gluteus maximus or gluteal muscles, you might have pressure on that sciatic nerve to cause some numbing into the legs. And then our gluteus maximus here, and our gluteus medius here. Our hamstring group. Okay, this is where we're going to do movement at the knee joint. It's going to be the posterior thigh. It's going to be thigh extension and knee flexion. And if you flex your knee, you can feel two tendons on the left and to the right of the knee that are posterior of the knee. Those are your tendons from the hamstring group. Then we have our sartorius. It's going to run oblique across the thigh and superficial. The thigh flexion is the Taylor's muscle for tailoring pants. Then we have our quadriceps femoris group, and it's going to be anterior thigh, and it's going to deal with the extension, or your quadriceps, or your quads. Then we have muscles causing movement at the foot and ankle. We have our tibialis anterior leg. It's going to dorsiflex and invert the foot. We have our extensor digitorum longus. It's going to be lateral to tibialis anterior. And it's going to be toe extension and dorsiflex the foot. We have our fibularis longus. It's going to be the lateral leg. It's going to plantar flex and evert the foot or eversion of the foot. We have our gastrocnemius. Now, I say it differently than what other people do. Most people call it the gastrocnemius. I say the gastrocnemius. It helps me spell it. And it's posterior leg, and it's going to be plantar, flexes the foot, and it's the ballerina muscle, it's your calf. And it's going to be attached through the calcaneal or a tendon, or Achilles tendon. Okay? And then you have your soleus, it's going to be deep to the gastrocnemius, and it plantar flexes the foot as well. So we see here we have our fibularis right here. This is our tibialis anterior. And then our extensor digitorum longus. This is a deep set of muscles comparatively. Well, this is the front of the foot. Sorry, I was thinking, let's look at the other one. Then we have our gastrocnemius. This is the lateral portion. The gastrocnemius and your soleus is going to run deep of that. And here's my tendon that they attach to the calcaneus here. So here's my soleus. Here's my gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius is two heads. And then we have our calcaneal tendon or our Achilles tendon. And if you rupture this, therefore it hurts. You see a lot of times there, like for instance, like when Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles tendon, he couldn't push off his foot when he walked, so he had his foot flat, and he just picked up his whole leg due to that muscle doesn't work anymore because he ruptured his Achilles tendon, and it allowed it not to be able to contract and do what it's supposed to do with plantar flexion of walking. And so there are two pictures here. And what I want you to do is I want you to label the pictures above due to the words here. This is going to help us practice for our test next Thursday and Friday. So make sure that you guys are ready to go and studying through these because this is a lot of vocab, a lot of memorization. So make sure you study through these daily. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time.